Donald Trump said the quiet part out loud again. In a recent tweet, he compared himself to Napoleon, saying, "He who saves his country violates no laws." Sound familiar? It should. History is littered with leaders who justified extreme actions by saying they were saving their country. So are we in a constitutional crisis, or are we just hurtling toward one at warp speed? Let's break it down. A constitutional crisis happens when the basic framework of government breaks down. And that can happen in a few ways. When there's no clear answer to a legal dispute, for example, a president refusing to leave office. When different branches of government refuse to respect each other's authority. Or when leaders just straight up ignore the rule of law. Historically, the US has flirted with constitutional crises in the past. Think Nixon's refusal to hand over the Watergate tapes and Bush v. Gore. But in both those cases, the system held. Right now, we're seeing major red flags. Let's start with Trump's own words. That Napoleon tweet, it wasn't just a random historical reference. It's a direct signal that Trump believes as long as he can position what he's doing as saving the country, he's above the law. The law doesn't apply to him. His administration is acting accordingly. Judges have repeatedly blocked his policies, and instead of accepting the rulings, Trump and his allies have repeatedly blamed the judges, saying the judiciary is causing a so-called constitutional crisis. So what's actually happening? Here are a few major things. Mass firings at key government agencies. Trump has gutted departments like the CDC, the FDA, USAID, crippling government functions. No one thinks the government isn't bloated. When you systematically fire career civil servants who have dedicated themselves to the preservation of the Constitution and not to the whims of one political party or another, you lose not only institutional knowledge, but core functions of how our government works. There are dozens of lawsuits challenging his policy. More than 70 lawsuits are currently in play, from challenging banning birthright citizenship to freezing federal funds, defying judicial orders. The Trump administration has already started ignoring court orders. So the question is, what happens if they continue to do this? Power shifts to private citizens and entities. And then there's Elon Musk, which is a whole other but related topic. Reports suggest that his companies stand to gain tremendously from these government cutbacks. And some fear his growing influence is helping reshape policy in a way that would benefit him. Trump is also continuing to curtail press freedom. The Associated Press was barred from covering White House events because it refused to adopt the administration's directive to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Then there's dropping charges against political allies. The Trump administration moved to clear corruption charges from New York City Mayor Eric Adams, but this sparked waves of resignations, with officials citing the erosion of democratic norms and concern about the administration's regard for legal constraints. Speaking of which, what happens if Trump just ignores the courts? Legal scholars warn this could push us into uncharted territory. The American Bar Association has already condemned what it calls wide-scale affronts to the rule of law itself. Vice President J.D. Vance recently argued that judges should not be able to limit the executive branch's power. That sounds a lot like laying the groundwork to defy the courts. Trump refuses to comply with judicial orders. Enforcement becomes an issue. It would be up to Congress or law enforcement. And with a Republican-controlled Congress unlikely to act, the crisis could deepen. We've been close to this point before, but the system has always held. But if Trump successfully defies the courts and gets away with it, that sets a very dangerous precedent. One where the executive branch answers to no one. So what now? Legal challenges will continue, and organizations like the ACLU are pushing back. Public pressure matters. Historically, when there are large-scale public protests, that has forced leaders to reconsider their position. Congress still has impeachment power, but with the current makeup of Congress, that seems highly unlikely. So are we in a constitutional crisis? We are on the brink. So what do you think? Are we facing a constitutional crisis? Will the system hold? Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more explainers.